Hello, this is RICKY, the Android guy. Hey guys, today I'm doing another side-by-side comparison, and this is between the Galaxy S5 and the Galaxy Alpha. These are Samsung's two best flagships before the Note 4, and today we're going to see which one really is best. Is it going to be a tale of the little brother trying to live up to the big brother, or possibly the little brother surpassing the big brother? Let's find out and see which one really is the best for you. The look and feel comparison. This is really where it comes down to with the Alpha and the S5 that make a big difference in just the design itself. So for the S5, it was the first flagship of the year for Samsung and still is their top selling phone by every means. It looks similar on the front to the S4 in previous generations, but where it changed a bit was on the side with a easier to grip feel, still plastic around the side, and then with a patterned backing that had little dimples all the way around it, which some people liked and some people didn't like. Overall, it's a good construction for a phone, but some people might want to switch out for, say, like a metal backing or a glass backing, which you can get third-party support for that. And they do offer cases that will make the phone feel more premium, as it were. But the one major thing you generally lose when doing that is the water resistance. It only comes really with the case, the backing that it comes with. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the Galaxy Alpha that really takes a different design take and style compared to the predecessor of the S5. This one has a metal frame around it, which really stands out and very striking. Metal around, especially on the bottom, it just has this nice shape to it that really stands out. It looks really good, and I love the new design of the phone being one color. What I mean by that is on the white S5 you have a silver trim. On the gold Alpha you have a gold front, gold trim, and gold back. Everything is the same color. And that goes for the same if you have a white phone, then it's going to be a white front, white metal, and white backing. Same with black and blue. This is really a lot nicer feature. Not to mention that I love these edges because not only do they look really nice, but they should help with dropping and cracking screens. Now, the Galaxy Alpha does have dimples as well, but they're a lot tinier, and they're more diamond shaped as opposed to regular circles. Therefore, when we zoom into it, we can see just definitely a better design overall when it comes to the pattern backing and the way it looks in its final finish. Overall, the Galaxy Alpha really does stand out when it comes to look and feel, and that is one of the biggest, if not the biggest advantage of the Galaxy Alpha over the S5. Web browsing. Web browsing is important to a lot of people because you want your websites to load quickly and to get what you need to right away. So for this purpose, we usually first take a look at the screen quality. On the Galaxy Alpha, we have a 720p display coming in at 312 pixels per inch, where the Galaxy S5 gives you a 1080p display with 432 pixels per inch. So overall, the screen quality should look better on the S5 when looking at both of these two devices, and you can kind of see it just in here, how clearly you can see it from a distance. Now let's check out and see how they both load. We're using the same browser on both, so we're simply seeing which one loads quicker and then how they both move on the website. And it looks like both finish around the same time. Let's check movement. The movement on both is pretty good, with the Alpha actually seeming to move a little bit quicker. Let's see, pinch to zoom. both about the same, and let's do double tap. So overall, it looks like both devices are running fairly smooth when it comes to web browsing. Neither one has any hiccup that's too extreme. So what it really comes down to is just screen size and preference when it comes to web browsing, because overall both performance-wise are equal in web browsing. Music is very important to a lot of people when comparing two smartphones. And with the S5 and the Alpha, the first thing we take a look at is speaker placement. The Galaxy S5 is placed unfortunately on the back end of the phone. It does have a little bump so that it won't be completely flat when you have it on its back, but the Alpha has a more ideal placement of being on the bottom side so you can hear the sound better. So we're going to try both devices and see which one has the better overall sound quality when listening to music or hearing anything from the phone.
Kinda crazy how the game has changed. The lights go on, they scream my name. The curtain goes down, I remain the same. But all that money don't equal the price of fame. From LA to overnight flights to Oahu, weekend late. Yeah, I'm going down to Vegas, they know where we stay. Last show in Cali, headed down to the state. I was a boy with a dream, had my head in the clouds. Now I'm sleeping first class, got a bed in the clouds. Hit my pops to pick me up, and he said he was proud. King shit with a beanie on instead of a crown. Yeah, counting all my blessings. Started from the bottom, now I'm sitting at the most high. Chief sees to the business, now I'm literally so fly, motivated by.
So hopefully you could hear that while both phones do sound clear, the S5 has just a little bit more oomph to it when it comes to sound quality and being louder of the two. So for this reason, music will slightly go to the Galaxy S5 over the Galaxy Alpha. Watching movies can be just as important as anything else you do on a smartphone nowadays. So when watching YouTube or Netflix or Hulu, you want to make sure you pick the right phone for watching movies. On the bottom we have the Galaxy S5 and on the top we have the Alpha. Let's see how they do. So, not sure if it's really translating to the video quality, but one thing I noticed when actually watching videos in a darker lit scene is that the S5 is definitely brighter compared to the Galaxy Alpha. And therefore, when comparing them side by side, the Alpha just looks a bit darker on every single scene. It's just something that would be important, especially, say, when watching movies outside and your screen isn't bright enough to actually see them, whereas the S5 would do a better job of that. Overall, for this and the obvious screen improvement size of a 5.1 versus 4.7 and a 1080p screen versus a 720p screen, you have to give it to the Galaxy S5 when watching movies. Now, one of the biggest hardware differences between these two devices comes with the camera. Camera is one of the biggest differences between the S5 and the Galaxy Alpha. However, when you first open them up, they look identical. It really is the same kind of layout with the same kind of options that you have on both of these two devices. One of the biggest differences is, of course, the 12 megapixel versus the 16 megapixel on these shooters. Other than that, though, their modes are pretty much the same. You have everything you need on both devices. But how is their outcome? Is it similar or is it different? Well, when we go to these photos, we see differences, but not necessarily always a clear winner. In this photo, for instance, the Alpha was actually able to take in more light, but it's a lot fuzzier because of it. Nothing is really sharp or clear in this photo. The S5 didn't take in as much light, but when zoomed out, at least, it looks a bit clearer in comparison. Now, when we switch to detail and color reproduction, both do not as well of a job as some others. Really, the color was more accurate a bit on the S5 compared to the Alpha, but it's a slight variation to it. In terms of detail, when we go right down to it, the S5 does have a little bit more detail in the center of the ball, but not by much. It's really a very close range. How about front camera? Well, on front camera, the S5 let in not as much light as the Alpha did, but it did have a bit more detail because of it. Again, this is more likely because of just how much light was let through at the time. In both of these photos, we get a lot of noise. On the S5, I would say it's a bit noisier on the side, but clearer on the face. And on the Alpha, it's a little bit less noisy, however, more fuzzy when it comes to the actual focal point of the face. On the flower photo, it's really just a high saturation on the Alpha versus a more true tone on the Galaxy S5. When we go towards the flower or the leaf, you can see that the Alpha has a much darker green compared to the truer green of the S5. However, in particularly this flower, it came out more clear compared to this one on the S5, but not by much. Then we brought it to the final test of the actual comparison of a sunset or sunrise photo, because this is one of the most difficult shots to get in photography. Overall, the S5 did do a better job with this one, letting through a bit more light, but also keeping more detail. And this is where the 16 megapixel comes in handy over the 12. When looking upon everything in the photo, it's a lot fuzzier and harder to make out on the Galaxy Alpha versus the S5. It just is a bit clearer, especially when you look at things like the Jamba Juice sign and the Starbucks sign, especially where you can't really see it at all on the Alpha, but you can see it on the S5. Overall, for detail-wise, the S5 is usually always going to be the winner in everything that it has, simply for the fact that it does have more megapixels, and that's what megapixels are. When you zoom into it, you can see more detail in your photos, and especially when you crop them. So overall, for the camera, I actually do give it to the S5, but a very slight difference. Yes, if I had to pick a winner, it would be the S5, but overall, the Alpha is a strong competitor to it, and the megapixels only really come in handy when zooming in. So if you don't zoom in or crop your photos, the Alpha is just as good as the S5. When it comes to these two in terms of gaming, well, that's pretty much an open and shut case. These two both have the same processor and the same graphics card, so there's not going to be really a difference in gaming. The only thing you can say that the Alpha might have a slight advantage of is having more built-in storage allows games to come from built-in storage as opposed to memory cards, which does overall usually portray a better overall performance in high-end gaming. It's just easier when you have more storage on your device so that it comes from one place instead of splitting it between the memory card and the phone. Overall, though, it's a negligible difference, so you have to give it to a tie between the two devices. Battery life is important to pretty much any user that owns a cell phone. Like I always tell anyone that's in the cell phone business, customers are going to be pretty upset if the cell phone dies in 5 hours after a full charge. And that's what you don't want with any phone. When it comes to the Galaxy S5 and versus Galaxy Alpha, these really are too. They don't drain that much when you're not using them. However, when you do use them, that's when the differences show. And the Galaxy S5 really does have a longer battery life than the Alpha. In my day-to-day usage, I notice that the Alpha will die anywhere from 2 to 3 hours before the S5 will. Now, that's pretty big comparing to the S5 will generally last me anywhere from 14 hours to as far as 18 hours, depending on how I use it. For my average day, it'll last more than 14, whereas the Alpha will last under the 12. So for overall purposes, if you want a longer battery life, you're going to want to stick with the Galaxy S5. Extras. Are the extras really different between two devices that have heart rate monitors and fingerprint scanners? Yes, actually. One of the best features of the Alpha is how small and compact it is. However, most people don't know that that did create sacrifices differentiating it from the S5. For instance, you did lose one of the biggest features, which is the water resistance. Being able to go 3 feet for 30 minutes in water is a really nice feature of the S5 and not one shared with the Alpha. Besides that, you have old-timey classics like a micro SD card slot on the S5, whereas that is absent on the Alpha. You also have an IR blaster, so you can control your TV, your cable box, pretty much anything that can have an IR receiver, even an Apple TV. You cannot do this with the Alpha. It does not have an IR blaster and has been one of the recent Samsung devices in history that does not have both a micro SD card slot and an IR blaster. Are these things you need or will miss? Well, that depends on the user. A price point comparison always is a must with any general consumer when choosing a smartphone. For the Galaxy Alpha and the Galaxy S5, at a 2-year contract price, they actually are the same. However, when it comes to full retail price, the Alpha is less, but not less than the 2-year contract price. Why this is? That's an anomaly. Generally, when a phone costs less, it will be less than a 2-year contract. But in this case, the full price of the Alpha would be $613, and the Galaxy S5 would be $650. Now, on a next plan, say if you have it for 18 months, that's a difference of $25.55 versus $27.09. So, roughly paying a little bit under $2 more a month for whichever plan you pick. Is that really that much of a difference to you? Well, in terms of price point, we always go for which one's a lower price, does give you basically the same thing, and is it the better bang for the buck. In this case, one thing that has to be considered in the Alpha's favor is that you get 32 gigs of storage built in, whereas the Galaxy S5 for a higher price gives you only 16. For that reason, the overall better bang for your buck has to be given to the Galaxy Alpha. Alright, let's tally them up and see who won. One of the biggest features of the Galaxy Alpha is it definitely has the better look and feel to it compared to the Galaxy S5. It feels like a more premium device and it feels good in the hand. When it comes to web browsing, the comparison is pretty much identical. You have essentially the same web browsing experience on both devices, therefore that one is a tie. When it comes to music and movies, the Galaxy S5 edges out the Alpha for having the brighter screen with the better sound, and of course just having the bigger screen in general for your movie watching pleasure. In terms of the camera, a slight edge went to the S5 just for having a bit more detail overall in more different types of photo styles. For that reason, the Galaxy S5 just barely edges out the Alpha on camera quality. In gaming, we find really a tie again. It's not too much of a difference in both because they both have the same processor and same RAM, as well as same graphics card. So you're going to have a pretty much identical gaming experience. Where you won't have identical experience is battery life. Typically, the S5, in my experience, lasted 2 to 3 hours longer compared to the Alpha. So for those people that really want just more of a long-term battery life overall, you're definitely going to want to go with the S5. In terms of extras, what extra things do you get in your device? Well, the Galaxy S5 does offer the water resistance, whereas the Alpha doesn't. And you do have things as a memory card slot, which again, the Alpha doesn't. And finally, you have one of the nicest features for the couch potatoes, and that is an IR blaster to control all of your electronics connected to your TV. Finally, when it comes to better bang for your buck, the Galaxy Alpha gives you a 32 gig storage for a less expensive price compared to the S5, which only gives you 16 for a higher price. Therefore, in terms of price point, the Alpha wins. When we tally these all up, the Galaxy S5 is the winner. Yes, though the Alpha is better for its look and design, as well as the way it feels, besides having price point and that, you're not getting too much more compared to the S5, especially when at the same 2-year contract price. My suggestion is, if you are getting a 2-year contract price phone at this price, the S5 is the better overall one to go with. However, if you do want just a better feel and design, and you wanted to save a bit of money, especially if you're on the next plan, then you might want to lean towards the Alpha. Overall, the choice is up to you, and I hope you found this comparison helpful. Thank you for watching. This is RICKY, the Android Guy.